Good morning, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time. I'm Jim Kaleka, and many of you have probably been on this call before, one of them, and if not, welcome. If so, apologize for any boring or repetitive dad jokes you might hear coming out of me. I love them. I'm a fan of dad jokes. My children and grandchildren, my grandchildren are actually, because they haven't figured it out yet, but we'll try to keep those to a minimum. Today we have key account class. This is the second in the cycle, because as you know, for those of you who've been on these before, we scheduled 5 of each of these different topics for key account for 5 different months, and then we are going back through. And so this is our second time around at identifying opportunities. And Tom, I know we drive it into the ground, but as far as this topic going in terms of identifying opportunities, I think that this is probably one of the key, no pun intended, topics as it relates to key accounts. Because if you can't identify opportunities, then where does that leave you in terms of your opportunity to be able to influence the chain accounts?
Yeah, I think, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I have lied every time I have ever said that this is the most important topic until today.
Hey, everybody just take note of that. Okay. Anything you may have heard.
I will never say it again. I will never say that today's topic is the most important outside of today, because that's the most important topic.
One today. Okay. So
if you want to be in key accounts, you have got to be not good. You have to be really good at this. And I don't think many people are.
No, well, why do you think that is?
I think people maybe aren't able to explain the concepts in ways that they're comfortable, and so therefore they avoid the conversation. They'll present it, but they won't collaborate.
Yeah, well, that's a great, and I know that we're going to talk about that part of it in terms of collaboration. I think the other thing is, Tom, is a lot of people have not really been exposed to it. They have not had the opportunity to really look at data in a way that can tell a story and take that information. You mentioned something on one of these, it might have even been a couple years ago, and I think you use it in your key account course, and that is it's easy to identify and understand some of this information, but it's not as easy to articulate it.
So yeah, it's easy to calculate.
There you go.
Not easy to articulate. And I don't think anyone, I'm looking around, I don't know that anyone would have been on this webinar back in February. Does anyone have any recollection? I don't know that anyone was. Ryan, I know, Ryan, you caught a lot of these. Kyle, maybe also. But I don't know that you were.
I don't know if it was February or not, but
yeah, I think Well, I think you're right.
It would have been March, because if you remember, Tom, we were going to start in January, and
it was March,
February. So it would have been March. But
I know FIFCO wouldn't have been online by then.
Okay, all right.
Maybe Avery was, but I'm not sure, Ryan, if you would have attended this one or not. I know Mark, and Thomas, I don't think you were on that one either. So good. The reason I ask, because this is such an important fundamental. We have updated the deck since the March program. It's going to be a little different, but boy, the concepts are tried and true and critically important. So
yeah,
anyway.
And so for those of you on live, we appreciate it. And as you know, if you've attended any of these, we like them to be interactive, and we like the fact that, it's really a dialogue we want to have.
Yeah.
And so no 2 of them are alike in that regard, except for, like I mentioned up top, some stupid jokes. But other than that, we like to try to change it up a little bit. And then, but most importantly, depending on who's on the call with us, that can make a big difference in terms of the involvement in which direction we go. And so the whole goal of this is to help everyone that joins become more proficient in understanding whatever the topic is. And today that topic is identifying opportunities. So as I mentioned, I'm Jim Kaleka. I've been working with Tom for many, many years, going on probably over 10 years. First, as he was our primary trainer at the distributorship I work with. I also worked with Mark there, and he had an opportunity to have exposure to the Tom Fox selling process. And when Tom decided to join and partner with Learning Evolution, they transcribed all of his material in the 3 different courses that he offered: sales process, key account leadership, and sales coaching and leadership. And then we started making that offering to people from an online standpoint. And then we've kind of taken a step further by creating an entire system whereby not only do we provide live training, but we also have the coursework that's available digitally. We have some tools that you can use in the market, including creating sell sheets and doing scorecards for those people that you may be riding with. So if you haven't taken advantage of any of those other features on the system, I strongly encourage you to. If you're not comfortable with it and you want to have some help, feel free to reach out to myself or Sean or Tom. So Tom, I'm going to take it over to you. You're the maestro here.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, this is a topic, and we talk a lot about exposure leads to understanding. Exposure leads to understanding, then developing skills, and exposure leads to understanding, developing skills, and then you get really good at it. So I know personally that the exposure initially, and I'm going back in the mid-90s when I worked at the Miller Brewing Company. I worked for an AB distributor right out of college, and then oddly, you don't see many people leaving an AB distributor going to work for Miller Brewing Company, or now Molson Coors, but I did. That's the chain person in Richmond, Virginia, where I worked, had retired. She had a baby, and so the Miller had an opening, and I competed against these folks, and so it was a chance to go to the supplier side, and I learned these concepts, but I know it took a lot of exposure for me, Jim. I honestly have recollection of probably 3 or 4 times, and I had really good rapport with my boss, so it was easy to be vulnerable to my boss because he was quite good at it. Not only calculating this analysis, but he was really good at articulating it. I was not. I mean, you follow the formulas, you can easily do the math, sure. But being able to explain it at a pretty high level where it's poised and confident, it took me a while. It took a lot of exposure, and I would say, I've always used this thing 5 times, and I really do think it was probably the 5th time that a light bulb went off. And I do know that we've had opportunities to work with several clients on custom programs, and we've had feedback of the 4th time through, I really think I got it. Before I kind of faked it, kind of understood it, but now I really understand it. And I think until you are at that level, you'll probably never be fully able and effectively able to collaborate where you have the confidence to explain the concept, which is identifying opportunities, showing gaps, and then being comfortable with this notion of being vulnerable, that you can then give the power to the customer with the simple words as, so this is what's going on. I know you're aware of it, but what do you think about it? Is this what you want? Question mark. Because when we can throw it back to them, you really never identify an opportunity until the customer says, yes, I want to improve, fill in the blank. So we got to give them power in order for them to ever be able to say back to us, I wish I had greater performance or development in the following. And then when they say that, not only write it down, kind of confirm it, repeat it back, and then you are off and running, because now you've got a true north. You've got a barometer. I'm going to say the rest of your life as you're calling on that account, maybe not that long, but in the short to intermediate term, you've got that true north, which takes your selling efforts to the next level, because now you're solving a problem versus selling your suggestions just like everybody else is. So that's the key. And so that kind of relationship is different than what most would have. I interviewed a buyer yesterday. Does anyone call on the on-premise at all? Is most everyone off? Some on. I interviewed a guy named Alfredo yesterday. He is the Benihana national, the global beverage alcohol buyer. And we talked about business reviews. And what he said to me was so ringing of what we hear from so many different retailers. This happened to be an on-premise, but it could be the same for an off. But when we got to business reviews, I said, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for people to identify gaps in my business.
Wow.
He said, I'm looking for gaps in terms of performance, of like, are people doing better than me in certain things that I'm carrying? Or are there parts of my business from an assortment standpoint, segments that are emerging that I'm not taking advantage of? I'd like to see those gaps.
How frequently do you hear people like at retail using the word that we use in the scenario?
That was shocking. I was blown away. And then, then I said, the magic question. I said, can you point out a few suppliers who are really good at that? And guess what he said? He said, I don't really have anyone I would say is really good at it. He goes, when I ask for it specifically, there are companies that can do it, but are they proactive? He said, no. I said, that would be a value to you. He said, big value. So I just share that because, that's that's not me, that's the customer. So Jim, you're wondering what quote is Fox going to have today?
Yeah, I am.
So why do you think I picked this one, Jim?
Because it's different from the one you used last time.
It is, but why is it an appropriate quote for today?
Because we want to collaborate with our clients.
So what do I mean by multiplication?
It increases the opportunities when you collaborate.
Have you ever heard, Jim, the term 1 + 1 = 4?
Yes, I say that all the time.
So that's like multiplying it like synergistically to another level.
Quantum.
So
physics. I'm good.
If we present and it's like a lecture, then that lecture equals like, okay, so you just get like something static. But if you collaborate on top of that, now you can multiply in terms of what we can get done. And there's one reason why. You collaborate for one reason: to get people on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're on the same page, now magic can happen. Multiplication, 1 + 1. Like when Harbaugh came to Michigan, that should have been 1 + 1 = 4. Now it's basically 1 + 1 = 0 at this point, which is unfortunate for us Michigan fans, but hope springs eternal.
Yeah. Okay.
3 weeks from this Saturday, Western Michigan better strap them up.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that. But I'm a fan. I want to talk just for a second about what you mentioned before the quote, and that was having to do with the exposure and the frequency. And I think with key account people with the responsibility of calling on chains, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have as many opportunities to make the pitch, to identify those opportunities, because their face time in front of the buyer is a little less frequent. The person who is up and down the street selling and calling on or off premise accounts, they have an opportunity to practice their craft, on a daily basis, multiple times in a day. So that exposure to the content and even practicing is limited. So I think all the more reason that it is important for people who, we get more repeated attendees in our key account courses than any of the others. And I think
really do.
Has a lot to do with it. People who are veterans, I know that Rodney has participated in these before and contributed to the content and has a lot of experience. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you weren't always with FIFCO, right? You were someone with another supplier?
No, I spent most of my career with the wholesaler.
Oh, with wholesaler. Okay. So I knew that you had some previous experience outside of FIFCO. I remember that from before. So I think that, unlike the salespeople having an opportunity to rehearse with teams and do it, people in this position don't necessarily have as many opportunities to actually rehearse that. And so I think that you have to be creative, whether it's with your colleagues or even with, with us or here or in front of a mirror, whatever it takes. But the fact of the matter is, without that comfort level that comes from repetition, I think that is one of the reasons why this can be a little bit challenging in terms of the articulation. So that's all. I just say that to encourage anybody that the more you are actually practicing that, it's not just having the exposure to it, but it's having that practice in delivering the message, identifying the opportunities, whatever the step or technique that you're trying to apply, that makes a difference. So that's all, Tom.
Cool. So yeah, I love the quote. John Maxwell may or may not know, an author, you know, motivational guy.
A lot of people don't know that he was related to the Maxwell Coffee Company as well.
Is that right? Drip, 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 drip.
Just thought I'd make something up there, Tom.
Yeah. You're going to MSU now?
Yeah.
Is that? Okay. So we know from our research that what all of these marquee retailers want from you all is this notion of being objective. We talked about that in the last webinar, just this idea that you've got a category first mindset. And then also that we're going to bring solutions, which is different than a suggestion. Solutions more around, you know, this idea of like every action needs an equal and opposite reaction. So we have to have a solution. But today we're going to talk about being fact-based. But again, we really want to expand that to not just say have numbers. The numbers have to identify gaps. So you need really two sets of numbers. You need the accounts numbers, whether it's internal data or syndicated data. And you need some comparable data points. So with syndicated data, we could have account numbers for the category and then a corresponding market to make the comparison. For internal, we could look at our internal numbers for that account, and then we could look at internal numbers for another account, a competitive account, a select competitor or competitors, or more likely a channel comparison. So you really aren't fact-based, in my opinion, unless you have comparative data, which identifies the gaps. And the gaps are, like we're going to talk about this, but the gaps are irrefutable. You can't debate that there's a gap. Now, the only thing you can debate would be, is the customer interested in that gap? So a good example we always use would be if you go into a really high-end retailer and identify an economy or value segment gap, they might not be interested. Hey, that's a $5 million opportunity, but it's not our shop. You know, so you could run into that. Most of the, I mean, all of the folks that are here are going to be representing brands that are going to be, you know, at mainstream or higher. So those segments tend to be of higher interest. So those gaps are likely going to be meaningful because they're big segments, or they're profitable, or they're growing, and you know they'd want to have their fair share of that business. And if they don't, and we point out the gaps, and if we can collaborate, there's likely going to be energy saying, I wish I had more. So that's the key. And here's the slide I was speaking to. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do know sometimes it takes 4, 5, 6 exposures, and it's not even listening to me. It's practicing, presenting the numbers, getting comfortable. And then, you know, we've got a few clients that we work with that we have like monthly 2-hour meetings. And what we have seen because of repeated exposure, you can see people who touch it and get a chance to practice it every month. I mean, their development skyrockets. The folks that touch it and see it today and then maybe don't revisit it anytime soon, you know, we tend to see that the understanding still is maybe not where it needs to be because, you know, they just haven't touched it enough. So I love this. It's life. If you're good at anything, it's because you've had repeated exposures, maybe because it's something you want to do and you really like to do it, or you're like, hey, I got to get good at this.
It's
So,
the one common denominator for all knowledge. Is
Yeah.
exposure.
And, you know, Jim, you know that part of this theme of today is not only doing the analysis and crunching the numbers, identifying those gaps, but a big part of it is that collaboration. And I've only got one slide on empathy, so we're not going to get into a big discussion, but the idea behind empathy is this level of interest, or what I've been saying more recently is this level of curiosity. I've just reviewed this gap. I'm curious to see what you think about it. I'm interested to see what you think about it. So you'll never know how they think unless you do what?
Ask 'em.
You got to ask them. And when you do, you got to be really patient to pause and let them think. And when they give us the response, now we're in their head in a positive way. Like, hey, listen, I'd like to improve that. Okay, tell me more. What do you mean? Can you give me like a threshold? When would you say you'd be like, okay, I'm pretty good. That's pretty good. I'd love that. So we'll get into that. So I'm not going to get into any more about empathy other than just collaboration is only going to come from this level of curiosity that I think many people might go into a meeting and be thinking, I got a lot of information I got to get through. I don't have time to collaborate. I don't have time to be empathic. And I would want to caution you that if you had 30 seconds, you should collaborate. If you had, 15 minutes, you have to collaborate, because everything else you're going to say can resonate and align with that collaboration. And when you do it and you see how well it works, you'll never go back. You'll never go back to what people have done and what most people are still doing today. Not an effective way to do it. So when we think about building presentations and where does this topic fit in, so we see really 5 major pillars to building a presentation. One, we got to confirm that we understand their KPIs. So if you don't know their KPIs, I mean, that's job one. And I think the way to get their KPIs is ask this incredibly difficult question to ask, which is, what are your KPIs?
I'm not the only one with dad jokes.
I don't know that everyone is going to get like an immediate response back. There could be some levels of trust issues that maybe they're not ready to share. Some chains, put together mini presentations and give them to every vendor so they can let them know the vision of what they're trying to get accomplished and the KPIs. Everyone's different. But there's nothing wrong with asking, hey, what are you charged with the category? Like, what are your scorecard measures, or what are your KPIs, goals? They're likely going to tell you, and they're going to be the same ones that everybody else are going to have. There's going to be a revenue growth goal, probably a profit goal. There could be a basket ring goal. Those are going to be the big 3. And they may not all be equally important. So we got to find out which one's the most important, because their bonus could depend on it. Again, we don't want to be intrusive, but the more we can find out around that, that's important. Now, the highlighted one is, now we're going to run numbers to say, all right, based on your KPIs, are there any opportunity gaps that would allow us to close? And if we did, how would that affect your KPI? So if there's ever a revenue goal, all of the numbers we would get from syndicated data, and even from VIP or any of our internal data systems, we have the ability to run the revenue portion of it, or in our internal data, it's going to be the cost dollars. Whereas syndicated data, we're going to get the POS, the retail revenue dollars. So we can usually easily align that right back to what our customers looking for, if they have any kind of a growth goal to help, get the category expansion. Next month, we're going to get into solutions. We do think that forecasting our impact, which again, when you create solutions, appropriately, you're going to have revenue impact. So we want to make sure we include that, because the revenue impact usually ties right back to the first bullet point. And then the last webinar, we're going to get into proper slide construction, and we have a lot of strong opinions around that. So again, one of the things that we encourage people to do, and we're certainly happy to send you this deck, or you could take a little photo of this, but this is the litmus test. We'd want you to be looking at all of your presentations against these 5 pillars and thinking, am I constructing presentations in a way that includes all of these bullet points? If you're not, then we think that the influence that you're trying to get is not going to be maximized. This is a pretty, it's 5 things, but when I review presentations, Jim, I would say, very few would have all 5. Very few, if any, would have all 5. So it's typically a gap.
They should be on this training event.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So when we think about today's class, today is all about what, the opportunities is what is going on. That's the gap here. What's going on? Well, here's what's going on. Here are the gaps. What's going on cannot be debated. The numbers are what they are. We got to be comfortable to present the numbers, whether they're positive or negative, because, it's one of those, don't shoot me, I'm just a messenger. And I think the one thing we should probably get on the table right now, it's probably obvious, but it's important, would be we have to assume our customers know what's going on. You certainly don't want to go in assuming that they don't know what's going on, because that could get uncomfortable. So we'll talk about that.
Even if they don't.
And I think if we were to poll the folks that are here today, I would imagine many of them would say, yeah, my customers manage many categories. They probably have no idea what's going on. And they rely on their vendors to help them understand what's going on. But the key is what's going on, identify, in 1 or 2 slides, maybe 3, I outline what's going on and then get their opinion around what's going on to start to identify meaningful gaps that we could close. And even if what's going on is positive, we want to collaborate, because it could be a situation where, yeah, we have really grown in this area. I bet you don't want to lose that. No, I don't. Maintaining it or improving it even further would be really important. Well, guess what? You just identified an opportunity. So, and again, I do think this idea of it's easier to calculate than it is to articulate is consistent with the Albert Einstein quote there at the bottom, when he says that if you can't explain it to a child, you don't know it well enough yourself. And I really think that is one of the reasons why a lot of folks don't present this, because while we're not accusing our buyers of being 6-year-olds, we have to be able to speak to it in ways that really the concepts are. And I'll give you an example right here. So, hey, if we looked at the business by, segment, here's what's going on when we look at your beer category by segment. Here's what's going on. Now, I know you're aware of what's going on, but let's just talk about seltzer. Seltzer right now, you're coming in at a 90 index, 10% less of your category mix is coming from seltzer compared to the accounts you compete against. Given the fact that seltzers are this emerging juggernaut, I imagine if you had a magic wand, you wouldn't want to be at a 90 index, would you? ? I mean, I can't imagine any retailer saying, yeah, being under indexed in seltzers is what we're going for. We don't want to take advantage of the fastest growing segment in the category. We'd rather let our competitors gobble all that up. So thank you for pointing it out, but we're good. We said no buyer ever, right? So again, you think about how many slides you might need. We know that, when you present segment numbers, you can always include the total category. You want to look at total category performance. There's always going to be a story there. Are they outperforming or underperforming? And then you start looking at how we can define the category. We can define it by segment. We can define it by package. We can define segments by style. So probably 2 or 3, Jim, would probably be enough of a look at the category to say, I kind of understand what's going on. And then we can talk about what's going on to see, is there anything about what's going on that you'd like to change? If our analysis starts at the brand or SKU level, which many presentations do, you're not identifying any meaningful opportunities. That's all about you. And what people don't sometimes recognize is if you really want to affect your brand and SKU, where you live, well, identify opportunities above the line versus below the line. So again, the 2 gaps we're trying to identify, there's performance gaps and there are development gaps. So performance gaps are all about the trends. So if you look here, those 2 well, it's the second and third columns. where you see Giant Eagle percent versus last year, and then the Giant Eagle remaining market versus last year. So the 25 versus 32 and all of those rows below it within those two columns are the performance gap. So how well is each segment performing? And even looking at the total category performance, we can start to make gaps. So the total category, obviously being up 25 seems like that's fantastic. But when you look at the market in the category and the market's up 32, they're underperforming. The last two columns speak to the development of the category. We're going to talk about that later. All right. So when we start with the category, and again, you can see in the bottom left, there'd be a lot of ways to present this, Jim, but at the bottom left is a quote of how you could do it. And again, notice that I'm saying, I know you're aware of these numbers. We're not going to present it as if they don't know. And I mean, I can't imagine it would be fun to present this because the buyer is probably not happy that they're underperforming. But if we start with the total category and the buyer says right out of the gate, yeah, I'm getting a lot of grief from my boss. We've got to improve category performance and get it up to match or exceed the level of the market. You know, we've identified a whopper opportunity because everything we present after this, we could say, hey, one of the ways we can help you get your performance back to that of the market or even greater is, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then we have maybe some promotional suggestions. Hey, one of the things we're going to suggest as a way to continue to drive better performance for the category, we got some promotional ideas that are going to really help, you know, return some significant revenue, growing your business, which is what you said you were looking for. You know, that is just, that's a great one. And if it was reversed, if the market was up 25 and the account was up 32, then we would reverse it and say, hey, I imagine with your outperformance, that's not anything you want to give back. I imagine keeping that 7% gap would probably be important to you, comma, am I right? Question mark. There's not a buyer in the world that would say anything other than, yeah, no, we're proud to be exceeding the performance of the market with the beer category, and maintaining that gap would be really important. Guess what? You've just identified an opportunity. And so it doesn't matter, you know, and this is important. It doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter. So never be disturbed or bummed that, oh my gosh, I wish they were underperforming. It'd be a lot easier for us to identify a gap. Well, no, not really. Not really. Make sense, everybody? So when we look at performance gaps, now you can see here the gaps. Now, if you were calling on Giant Eagle, go in the chat bar and tell me how many of these segments at Giant Eagle are outperforming the market. Ryan, are these folks wrong? Are you right, or are they right?
No, I'm wrong. I was looking at the share, but they are.
It takes a big man to admit he's wrong.
Yeah, no, I was wrong. They're getting skunked.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen this happen ever or very often. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we look at the segment and they're all underperforming. You're all right. So we don't see that very often, but I do want to get in a quick discussion. Would some folks be concerned about presenting what's going on when the story is you're getting your clock cleaned? Would anyone be concerned about presenting that?
I wouldn't think so. I would think that they probably already have access to this information. They already know it.
Yeah, and it's not, we're not going to present it going, oh my God, are you a buffoon? Look at these numbers. Oh my gosh, I can't even get over how you even have a job. Probably not the way to present.
I'm thinking that they might be, you may be presenting to a new buyer.
Yeah. Hey, welcome. Yeah. I'm only asking because I remember back when I was working for Miller Brewing Company, and there were many chains that, we would present numbers and it's like, geez, they're not keeping up with the market. And I remember being a little bit timid of like, I would search, Jim, for good news, because I felt like I wanted the buyer to like me and I wanted to find good news so I could make them feel good. And that's an immature way to look at it, but that's what I did. I know until I got really this comfort level with gap analysis. But early on, I would say I was probably not focused on the bad, that we could improve and it would actually be meaningful, production. I was trying to, cheerlead, going, nice job. You're doing really well here. Aren't you a great category manager?
Do you think, there are some times I recall, even with independent accounts, when you call them, where the beer category isn't as important to them as some of the other categories, or their philosophy about it. They don't necessarily, they want to be there. They know it's important. They have clients coming in, buying, customers. But in terms of what their image is as a retailer, Meyer was up and down about, how much they wanted to actually promote the beer category for, many years. They would be hot and cold in that regard. And so I think that would be the only possible negative, not even a negative, but a situation to kind of overcome, especially if you knew that. So you may encounter a buyer who says, oh, you know what? I don't really care about what the rest of the market is doing necessarily, because our numbers are good up and down. That's the only possible scenario I can think of where somebody wouldn't be embarrassed by the fact that they were getting beat in this category by the rest of the market. It's the only.
Yeah, and honestly, I have never run into that.
Yeah.
Especially when, if they're managing the beer category, that's a big category. It's 4% on average of a grocery revenue. So, there are some categories bigger than that, but there aren't very many. So, and maybe the chief merchandising officer who's over every category might go, yeah, beer is not strategic, but boy, for that person who calls on it.
Okay, that really is more the issue. It's at the merchandising level above.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we would go in and try to, that would be the wall we would run into. It would be the buyer was fine, but it's beyond, it's beyond my control. Whoever's in charge of operations doesn't want to come in and see displays all over the store. That's not the image they, so that's all. But those are things sometimes you don't have any control
All right. So again, I think you saw how I would recommend presenting like the category. So, hey, Jim, what we're looking at here is your beer category. We're breaking it down by segment, looking at both performance and development. Now, I want to start at the category level, Jim, and I know you're aware of these numbers, but right now you are underperforming. 25% growth is typically pretty good, but the market's up 32. I know you're aware of it, but how big of a concern is that? Question mark. So that would be a way to present it. Now, notice that there was a question. So Jim would have had to have answered that question, which again, we would have assumed that there'd be some energy to say improving it would be important. Oh, by the way, we just identified an opportunity. Would anyone like to take a crack at presenting the hard seltzer number? And only focus on performance. Don't worry about we'll get to the other two columns on the next slide. But again, the whole key is to present what's going on, but then make it a question. Would anyone like to give it a shot?
I got you, Tom.
All right, let's hear it.
Literally exact same thing that you just said. Hey, listen, Tom, I was taking a look at the Nielsen data across the board, and you guys are you're kicking some major butt in the hard seltzer category. You guys are up 157%. However, the rest of the market is at 176%. I'm just curious, like, how important is it to you to fill that gap?
Mark, that's perfect. I mean, that's all we have to do. Because what are the range of things they could say? They could say, no, we aren't interested. We're comfortable with this gap. That's likely not what they're going to say. They could say, yeah, we've noticed that, and we're definitely going to be putting plans together. We do not want to be underperforming with this emerging seltzer. So that was perfect. That was perfect. And so nice job. I mean, but as people are kind of watching this, and if you heard how Mark presented it and how I presented the total category, I mean, let's just have a quick discussion. Is this exactly how you're doing it now? Is this an opportunity? Let me hear from some folks.
One thing that we're starting to get into the spring reset season, and we're seeing that a lot of these retailers have kind of custom decks. So when you do present to them, they want you to kind of follow the map a little bit.
Yep.
So it's not as easy. Whereas, like, you know, I did all the modules over the last couple of days. We don't necessarily get to build the deck from scratch. Start from this type of place where we're like looking at the big view and then identifying opportunities. Sometimes you got to work that in a little bit.
You might have to work it in. Yeah.
Like, I know a year ago, we just got our meeting invite for Kroger yesterday. 6 months ago, when we did the spring one, we were off about 2 weeks on the data. So when I brought this up, hey, the most recent data shows that there's this opportunity, he got really offended. And
Did he really?
Oh yeah, man. And he, you know, he could be a little salty sometimes, but it derailed things by a couple of minutes. And when you got 30 minutes and he's taken 3 of it to correct your grammar type of deal, you know, you just lost 10% and a lot of momentum. So
he had a data report that was 2 weeks fresher than yours.
Mine. Yeah.
And so he had seen improvement in the last 2 weeks that you didn't pick up on.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he just kind of questioned my data and my research a little bit. And, you know, I think, and then we got back on track, but it isn't as easy to just be like, hey, I'm looking at the big data and I noticed that there's this opportunity. Would you like to fill that opportunity? It wasn't as organic as that.
Well, okay. So that's a great point, Ryan. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I do think that then might, if we are getting data, not, you know, on a daily basis or weekly basis, if it's more of a monthly basis, I think based on what Ryan just said, it's probably important to say, hey, the freshest information that we have is this. Now you may have fresher data and maybe the story has changed. That would probably allow you that, you know, that you're getting a little relief and not being in the penalty box, because when they come back and say, that's not an all way. Okay, well, listen, then in the last 2 weeks, if you've seen improvement, then forget about my slide. I'm happy to hear it. I imagine you want to see it continue. So we still can go right into the opportunity identification without hopefully getting into any, you know, argument. And I'm not suggesting that you would have said, you know, I'm laying the law down here. And, you know, I'm sure, Ryan, you didn't present it that way, but I can imagine they probably looked at your source and said, shit, he's got data 3 weeks older than what I have. You know, this is a waste of time. So I think prefacing it based on what Ryan said probably makes a lot of sense.
I'm going to use it as an opportunity this time, Tom, like definitely learn from the mistakes and
yeah,
your training to be like, our data is through, call it like, you know, we'll be submitting our stuff a month or 3 weeks before our meeting, just to be like, hey, our data is through August 1st. Is that what you're looking at? You know, or have there been any changes since then? To again, to just get him talking and offer him that question. So to that affirmation that you preach.
Excellent. Excellent. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Okay. So performance is kind of the easy stuff. The harder information to present, in my opinion, is the development information. So we have highlighted here in yellow the development columns. So those first 2 columns highlight the share for each, in this slide, the share for each segment within Giant Eagle, and then the Giant Eagle remaining market. So that share comparison, we can really highlight a couple key measures which allow us to understand how those numbers relate to each other. So for example, in the below premium, 5.9% of Giants beer category comes from below the market. There is a greater contribution coming from below premium to the full category. So a 5.9, you divide 5.9 into 9.8, it'll give you this calculation that if we then multiply that by 100 to get a whole number, we would get the index. So in this case here, 5.9 divided by 9.8 equals 0.6, multiply it by 100, that's a 60 index. And everything is always compared to, this fair share at 100 index. So 40 index points or 40% less of Giant Eagle's mix is coming from below premium. They're probably really happy with that. That's probably not enough, even though if you then equate it to dollars, which I will get into in a second, $5 million might be a big opportunity gap in numbers, and it probably is, but it's not the shopper they're looking for. So anyone going in, like focusing on that gap, they might ultimately run into some trouble because it's probably there's not a lot of energy to bring in, that less affluent shopper who's focused on price and not the high end. So I'll get into how to do it. Now I do have a quick true or false, and maybe someone can unmute and give me your answer here. Is this true or false? Anyone know? Jim, they might all just be really courteous right now, not to step on anybody else. So they're going to probably go, I'm not going to take the limelight.
That's what I think.
It sounds true.
Mark, what do you think?
It sounds true.
It seems like it would be true. Do you think there's any chance I'm trying to trick someone?
Yes.
The answer is yes. I am trying to trick. It is not true. It's false. When we look at the gaps, when we look at these gaps, so within like the below premium, we're not suggesting that Giant Eagle is selling 40% less below premium volume per outlet. That's not at all what that's saying. That's just saying that if you look at the total mix by segment for the category, they're getting 40% less of their mix. So the perfect example I can give would be like, look at Walmart with regard to craft. Walmart comes in at about a 60 index on craft. And do you think the average Walmart outlet sells 40% less craft than their average competitor? There's no way. No way. They sell a lot of craft, but not in comparison to how much below premium and other mainstream beers that they sell. So their mix isn't that great. It's only because their category is so massive. And so and the exact opposite would be with this Giant Eagle. Giant Eagle probably sells a decent amount of below premium beer because those stores sell a lot of beer, but their mix, which is what the index is telling us. Index is all about the mix. So the other thing we can calculate is the dollar gap. So the way we calculate the dollar gap is we take the value of a share point. So if I can get my little annotation here. So if I get my little spotlight. So the total category is 145 million. So if we divide that by 100, we're going to get 1.4 million. So that's the value of a share point. And then all you have to do is subtract the market share from the account share to create this share gap and multiply the share gap times the value of a share point. So in this one here, we look at the 1.4 million. So that's just simply taking the total category volume of 145 million, divide by 100, we get to 1.4. And then what we do is we take this 3.9 share gap, 9.8 minus 5.9, equals a positive 3.9. So positive 3.9 multiplied by this 1.45 million here is going to give us the 5.6. And notice it's a positive number. So what that means is if Giant Eagle got religion on below premium beer and said, I want to get my fair share, they would go from a 5.9 share up to that 9.8, bringing 5.6 million potential dollars into that below premium segment, making it a 100 index, or now they're getting their fair share. Their mix of below premium would be equal to that of their average competitor. So the math is pretty simple. You take the share gap, which basically says, let's start with the market, take the market share, subtract the account share. That's going to give you your share gap, and multiply the share gap times the value of a share point, which is this 1.4 million. So pretty simple. So now what I want you to do is I want you to calculate the domestic super premium. Calculate the domestic super premium dollar gap. So that's this row right here. So the first thing you would do is take the market share, subtract the account share, multiply it by the value of a share point. And that is all it is. And when you do that, go ahead and throw it in the chat box. Is Thomas right? I'm getting something different. So Thomas and Mark, check your math. Again, we're taking that's funny. Way to go, Thomas. Love it. Yep, there you go, Thomas. That's what I got. What did you do wrong?
Oh, I did the math wrong on 6.1 minus 4.7 and calculated it at 2.4 instead of 1.4. Yeah.
Did everyone else get a
Smarter than
little over?
calculated.
Everyone else get a little over 2 million? Everyone else see how Thomas got that?
Mhm.
Oh, I see what I did. I looked at the domestic premium
Oh,
share numbers
That's actually what I did too.
instead of the super premium share numbers. That's what I did wrong.
anyone have any questions as how that $2 million number got calculated? You basically just take what's it, 1.4, positive 1.4 times 1.4 million. That's how we got it. And again, do you think the retailer would be interested in trying to capture that opportunity gap? Probably would. They probably would. So this is what it could look like. And again, all we're doing here is reporting the news. You really can't refute the numbers. They are what they are. Now, to Ryan's earlier point, if you don't have the most up to date, I do think based on his comment, which makes a lot of sense to me, maybe tread lightly and say, hey, this is the latest information I got. And I don't know how much would be able to change in 2 or 3 weeks, but it's certainly possible. And again, Ryan, I know that had to be really uncomfortable, but I would also not apologize for the data that you have. Your company's invested money, and in good faith, we're trying to identify opportunities for you. And, we're working with what we have. And normally, I think what you could say, normally 2 weeks may not make that big of a difference. In this case, it did, but normally we wouldn't see that.
You know what I did wrong too was I told them like, hey, we see that this is what we see, as opposed to asking him
Yeah.
if what we saw is accurate. You know
Good
what I
for you.
mean? So I kind of put them like, and they got the guy in the background just typing away, you know, checking your math the whole time. So yeah, I'll learn from that mistake.
That's like a jerk.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the scene in Good Will Hunting where like he's interviewing for like the CIA or whatever, and the guy's in the shadows.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you want to work for the NSA? That's like kind of what's happening right there.
That's funny. So this analysis we can do by segment. We can also do it by pack size. Within the craft segment, we can do it by style, or within FMBs, we could do it by flavor. You know, there would be no shortage of how we could do this. But to me, you know, this is, you know, table stakes. If you want to capture opportunities, you know, this is the analysis you have to run, and then you have to be able to explain it. You know, which again, not for some people, if you haven't had a chance to really touch it and play with it and rehearse it, it doesn't present itself. It's not rocket science. It's not, but it's a little bit more advanced over performance numbers. You know, those second and third columns on trends, most of us have been talking trends since the day we got in this business. Trends are pretty easy to talk about. The development numbers aren't hard, but if they're foreign, it's not going to roll off your tongue like you really know what you're talking about until you've rehearsed it a few times. Like I say, I know it, for me, I know it took 4 or 5 times. It did. And then a light bulb went off and everything changed. But it's important, again, to speak to this idea that the index is all about mix. It's not about, you know, the volume that, you know, that opportunity gap is just saying, if we were to improve share levels within whatever segment we're talking about, how is this going to affect the business? You know, well, it'll move you from, in that below premium example, you know, from, you know, getting 40% less of your mix coming from that segment to now you're at a fair share level, if they were to achieve that. And sometimes you can take the gap, like if we go back to the gap, like you could look at that below, that domestic super premium gap of you know, let's just say, and you know, I have 1.9 million. I think my calculations are a little different than yours. You know, Thomas came up with a little over 2 million. He probably took the numbers that I gave him. My share levels took it out more decimal points. So they're really the same number. Thomas isn't wrong at 2 million. I'm not wrong at 1.9. We're using a little different numbers. I used mine off of an Excel that, again, the decimals went out to the 8 or 9 decimal points. But the point would be, even if you think to yourself, well, geez, you know, I don't know that we can get all the way there with domestic super premium. Maybe we can get half of that. So now maybe we could say, hey, you know, this is a $2 million gap. Let's focus on getting half that gap closed, which would still represent $1 million. There's no rules here. So you can do whatever you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I have a question for you. How, you know, just from an experience standpoint, how many buyers do you think, buyers, now, not people going in to sell them, have an understanding of the value of an index point and that gap and how they can change their mix in that regard? How many of them do you think really are looking at their category in that regard? Is it common, or is it more?
Well, I would actually love for our audience to answer that. I have an opinion how many, but I would imagine all of you are much closer to the customer when you're presenting this than I am. So anyone have an opinion? How many people, I mean, no one's going to ever stop you and go, hey, you know what? You and I got good rapport. Walk me through this, man, because I don't understand any of it. I don't think anyone's going to be vulnerable like that. But how many folks, to Jim's question, like this would be like, I don't get this. Anyone have an opinion?
From a chain perspective or total account perspective?
Chain, from the buyer's perspective.
I mean, chain, I would say it's the majority, somewhere between 60 and 80%.
60 to 80 would get it.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
60 to 80.
Yeah, I that's probably what I would say. I certainly know some of them might not, but I would think that my gosh. A lot of suppliers are probably wanting their key account people to be doing this. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's doing it, but I would kind of agree. Does anyone have a different opinion? I would certainly think half, maybe a little more than half would understand it.
Well, I'm not asking if they would understand it if you were presenting it to them. What my question has more to do with how many buyers are actually looking at their category in terms of developing it and keeping it going, growing it, however you want to, and they're looking at it from a share index per point perspective versus a trend perspective. Because the opportunity you identified with trend and gap still produces dollars. It still produces a great opportunity. When I look at this from an index standpoint, to me, it is like, you talk about empathy being the holy grail. To me, this is the holy grail in many cases.
It is, yeah.
You can really, if you can't find an opportunity that's of value from a trend standpoint or volume, there's nobody, I think, is going to have 100% index across every single segment.
No, you're right. There's
So
always
there's
going to
gotta
be
be an
there's always going to be gaps. Yeah. Okay. So now I think I understand. Yeah. So the buyers, I would say, they're going to have a lot more energy on the yellow highlighted columns than they would performance.
Okay.
Now they're going to care a lot about that category performance,
Mhm.
but when they look at meaningful ways to really strategize around improving the category, they're looking at development.
Okay.
Now, obviously, development and performance are kind of tied together,
Right.
because the only way you can ever gain more share is to flip those performance numbers. So they're kind of tied, but you can't as easily calculate what would happen if the performance changed as easily as you can. If we added 1 or 2 share points, it's really easy to calculate what would that look like.
Right.
So yeah, good question. All right, so now look at that dollar gap, right? Look at that dollar gap. Now my question here is the following. True or false? True or false? Rodney, I see you unmuted. You are ready to give us your insight here. We are waiting with bated breath.
I've got to second guess myself. I'm going to say true.
Okay. Anyone disagree with Rodney?
Oh, following the leader here.
Okay. Anyone disagree with Mark and Rodney? Looks like Jim's getting ready to raise his hand.
I'm only going to disagree just to mix it up here.
Ryan or Thomas, any opinion?
It feels like it's true. It's like, win totals in Vegas.
So
like,
you're all jumping on the Rodney bandwagon here.
feel like it. Yeah. I like this Rodney guy.
Yeah. Thomas, are you going to join Jim or are you going to join the mass?
I actually don't think it's true.
Thomas, doubting Thomas.
Somebody's got to be there, right?
Someone's got to be there. But you know what? You took a jump and you are wrong. Rodney was right. If you were to do like an Excel like auto sum here, it would be really close to, now again, because there's decimal points. And you know why it's 0 and you know why Rodney is right is because whenever you're comparing mix, it's always based off of 100 share points. So if one segment is 2 share points underdeveloped, some segment has to be 2 share points well developed. So in this case here, when you look at the total column of dollar gaps being some are positive, some are negative, they would add to 0. So Rodney, as we all knew already, you are wise beyond your years. And Thomas, I love that you took a stand and made a statement. Jim, as well, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for enticing Thomas to the dark side.
I told you I was just doing it just to mix it up. But I do have a
Yeah, me
question,
too.
because I don't know how many times I've seen these presentations.
Enough to where you should be able to do it yourself.
I know. And well, and the fact that I'm not is, speaks volumes.
It just shows you that exposure doesn't always equal you got to touch it.
Yeah, but
If you
So-
present, if I was like,
but are you just trading dollars though, if that's the case?
well, you would be the value of a share point is
It's
going to be the
value.
same value. The revenue is going to be the same for a below premium segment as it is for craft. But that doesn't mean profit is created equal
Right,
or
right.
margin.
Gotcha.
So, and even the number of cases, it's going to take a lot more cases of below premium to equal the value of one share point than a lot fewer cases for craft or
Mhm.
for seltzer. So the share points are created equal in terms of revenue, but they are not created equal in terms of number of cases or profit dollars, or certainly margin.
So
Okay.
when does that presentation happen? The next part of the profit side?
Well, if their KPI was all about profitability, then I think you'd want to start getting into how continuing to get people to trade up. What's the difference in a case of premium beer or below premium beer compared to a case of craft or seltzer or an FMB would be really easy to do. But I think then it would speak to, hey, based on your margin, and and that may be as simple as that, Mark. It might be as simple as, hey, let's go back to let's go back to the number here. Hey, if we look at that dollar gap, hey, there's a $1.9 million opportunity within super premium. At your margin of 35%, not only are you going to be bringing in potentially $2 million more of revenue, but that's $700,000 in profit. If they have a 35% margin or 30, whatever that number is, compared to if we take away $2 million from below premium, at 15%, you're only losing $300,000. So again, there are no rules, and you're limited to your creativity, how you could really make those numbers come alive. So that you make a good point. All right. This slide here is a great reference. It's kind of the how-to. If you're wondering, how did Fox get to any of those calculations? They are all here. So again, you're welcome to get a copy of this. You're welcome to take a screenshot, whatever you want to do.
All of that is also in the system under resources too.
There you go.
So you just typed in glossary or whatever, but any of the terminology is available to you.
Anyone have any questions about performance and development? So I'll just do really quick. I'll just do this here. So, and if someone else wants to practice, I'd be more than loving the chance that someone else wanted to do it. But if I was going to present, let's say, the craft row here. So hey, Mr. or Mrs. Giant Eagle buyer, listen, what we're looking at here is your beer category. We're breaking it down by segment. I wanted to talk to you about the craft segment and talk about what's going on there. And again, I know you're on top of your numbers, but the segment at this point is underperforming. You're up 10%, market's up 16%. So I imagine that is something that is of concern to you. We'll get to your development, but as you already know, your development with craft is pretty strong. I imagine you wouldn't want to give away much of that advantage, would you? Question mark. And then speaking to just what is at risk here. If your trends continued, we look at the development of your craft segment, you're coming in right now at a 122 index. What that means is you're getting 22% more of your mix from craft than the average competitor. The problem is, though, that index is going down if we don't turn those trends around. And what's at risk really, it's a $7 million surplus that you've gained now, that if your share continued to erode, that $7 million will start going to your competitors. And again, I imagine you wouldn't want that to happen, would you? Question mark. That would be how I would present that. Would anyone like to present the seltzer row and focusing on development? And notice I'm using the terms outperforming, underperforming, well-developed, underdeveloped. Why am I using well-developed? Why wouldn't I just say overdeveloped?
Because that makes them feel like they have too much of it, which is
They've gone too far. Exactly. And so that makes sense, right, Ryan? I mean, so instead of saying overdeveloped, well-developed is just a more professional way to say it, the way I look at it. I still see a lot of people using over-indexed, under-indexed. That's fine. I think a 6-year-old's going to understand well-developed, underdeveloped versus over-indexed, under-indexed. Not that a lot of people don't use that, because a lot of people do. Would
Just
anyone want to
imagine if-
give this a shot?
Imagine if the buyers were 6-year-olds. How easily influenced they would be. You bring
Hey,
candy- you could
Here's
bring
a hot,
candy to the,
here's a video game. Can I have
Yeah,
that display?
exactly. Here's $100 V-Bucks for Fortnite.
Does anyone want to give it a shot? Anyone other than Mark? It'll be fun. Look how much fun Mark had. Don't let Mark have all the fun.
I've learned that you're always supposed to put yourself out there first so that you don't get called on later. when
Well,
you-
that's, you nailed it, baby. A lot easier presenting the performance numbers than, Mark, you are wise beyond your years as well. All right, Jim, may have to have you present it.
What?
I can't get a volunteer. Present the seltzer numbers, player. Come on, player.
Okay.
So what are we looking at? What are we looking at here? We're looking at,
Yeah, Tom, what we're looking at here is how well developed the seltzer category is. The seltzer segment within the entire beer category. And as you can see, you're doing a pretty good job in terms of your beat.
what does 127 mean, Jim? I'm not even sure I know what that means.
It means that if you're looking and you're comparing what your seltzer mix as a part of the mix is doing compared to the rest of the market, you are outperforming and you have it more well developed than the rest of the market as it relates to the mix
How much more?
by 27%. So if you're looking at being, 100% as being, the benchmark where you may want to be, you are well developed at 27%. But at the same time, I'm imagining that that's not something that you would want to give up. Am I
No,
right?
no. But why is it negative, Jim? Why would if I'm doing so well in seltzers, why is that a $5 million negative number?
Well, it only is representing the fact that if that is what you stand to lose or erode, if you are not maintaining or growing, that the
Way to
development.
go, Jim. Way to go, Jim. Jim, you have grown professionally today. You've grown.
All
How's
the
it
way
feel?
from- all the way from London, feels fantastic.
How's it feel? Do you gotta feel good about that, Jimmy?
I do, Tom. Lived-
Any comments about development analysis? Any comments, any questions? Geez, Fox, this is the most interesting thing I've ever seen in my life. I just can't get over how great this is.
Quickly, so I don't know about everybody on the call, but for Tom and myself, and it is that trade-off. Like you look at the previous slide, like the two biggest segments were craft and seltzer, and it does seem like one is losing space to another. So and you look at this too, like both of them have a really high risk. You look at craft is like 7.2 million and hard seltzer is 5.4. So it feels like it's a choice. Like, it used to be kind of split, half craft, half big beer. Now it's a third, and it's starting to trend a little bit towards seltzer. Any recommendations on that? Like both of those are at risk. I'm going to be selling both of those during this season. So I don't know. I guess I'm just looking for a little bit of feedback on, I can't pull from one from the other because I need that one too.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, what are the talking points? You get two things that are at risk. There's going to be a lot of traffic coming at those buyers. So, any suggestions on how to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy answer is while both segments have lots of highly productive SKUs, both segments have a lot of not very productive SKUs. Matter of fact, I did a seminar Monday for a client who's in the seltzer business, and we were looking at, I can't remember which market it was. It was a market out west. The top 5 SKUs were all down 50% or more. The top 5. So the consumer is racing to the new innovation. So I don't think, Ryan, it would be that difficult for you to find a lot of pretty easy targets. And I would imagine the retailer is now not any longer looking at seltzer as this, I got to add 5 more feet or 8 more feet. They're probably thinking, okay, I'm maybe overspaced. So there's going to be a lot of SKUs that are going to probably be held accountable. And I don't think it'll be difficult for you to find which ones. It's always been easy to find many, many craft SKUs, despite the fact that craft is still a, you know, by and large, very healthy and now a pretty damn big segment, depending on which market you're in. But even then, there are still SKUs that are going out of favor. I can't imagine the challenge retailers have right now with how do you manage assortment for seltzers when, you know, it is, you know, even the ones with a ton of demand are off 50%. It's nuts. So I think it's just going back to, you know, identifying those SKUs that are just, you know, have a lot of availability, a lot of CWD, but their velocity has now dwindled to nothing. And I can't imagine there's going to be scores of them.
Tom, are you suggesting only within that particular segment, or are you
Not-
looking at any SKU? Because
I mean, I think if it's a fall refresh or a spring reset, I think you probably have carte blanche as to what
Yeah.
you could suggest. But if you're going to do a plug and play, it's probably a lot easier to do, you know, within segment.
yeah, because it would seem that, you know, to your point earlier on whether the profit per point, or excuse me, or within that case, or the total dollars and gross dollars are greater, that you could identify an opportunity that would exist there, that you don't want to take away from the seltzer, you don't want to take away from the craft, because even though it seems to be pretty well populated in that space,
Yeah.
it still provides a lot of profit and margin versus maybe something in a sub-premium category or budget.
Yep. So now, if we have internal data, can we do the same analysis? Well, you can't do it by category with internal data, but you can do it by portfolio. So in this example here, if we're looking at the total Boulevard portfolio, you can see how Hy-Vee compares with just Boulevard. We can still do performance, we can still do development, but it's at the portfolio level. That's as high as we can go versus syndicated data we were just looking at could get to category. So in this example here, if you look at my little, let me find my little highlighter here. So we can still look at trends. So the total trends for Hy-Vee with Boulevard are up 8%, but chains A and B are outperforming Hy-Vee. Their business is growing faster with Boulevard than Hy-Vee. And then if you looked at the same with the depletion dollars. So performance-wise, they're underperforming. But then if you look at the sales per outlet, so we can take the total volume or the total head count or store count of each of these chains, divide it into our total case sales to get a sales per store. So the sales per store is our development number. So we are averaging 50, Hy-Vee averages 50 cases of Boulevard products compared to 76 with chain A and 64 with chain B. Or if we look at it on a dollar basis, Hy-Vee averages 13,200. The other two chains are averaging a greater amount of cost dollars per store, which we then can identify a gap. So it's, you know, the dollar gap is calculated by taking the share gap difference multiplied by the value of a share point for syndicated. But for this, it's actually much easier. We just take the gap between, in this case here, we're just going to take, you know, the chain B comparison. 16.8 is really you know, not quite $4,000 greater than what Hy-Vee is doing. We can take that 3,900, multiply it by the 50 outlets. It leaves us with this potential of $184,000, which again, if you're calling on a chain, I imagine many of you call on chains that you don't have syndicated data for. You're only using your internal data. Well, this is what you would do with it. And I think the $184,000 would be something that would catch the attention of the customer going, hey, you mentioned earlier how important it was to increase sales. Well, you know, we know when we look at what's going on with your business within our portfolio and compare it to some of your key competitors, there's an opportunity. not only a performance opportunity, but there is a development opportunity as well to the tune of $184,000. And if we can, even if we can get half of that back and bring $90,000 more back to the category, it's going to grow your sales, which is exactly what you said you wanted to get accomplished. So it ought to get their attention. And then we would go through. Now, how do you do this? Really going forward, it's as simple as populating the columns that are highlighted in yellow. Then the rest of it auto calcs. It's actually that simple. That simple. Anyone have any questions?
Just a couple questions.
Yeah.
In that scenario, we can go back to the other one. Yeah, that one. So if you're sitting down and you're talking with Hy-Vee, I guess this is an opinion question for really everyone on the call. Is it common practice to, instead of saying chain A, chain B, actually calling out who those other retailers are? So, would you say Kroger is chain A, or, Walmart is chain B? And I know they're not on the same platform as Hy-Vee, but you get where I'm going with that.
Yeah. Anyone have an opinion on that?
I stay away from it, and here's my reasoning is if I'm willing to share his competitor's numbers with him, he can't trust me not to share his numbers with his competitors. That's why I stay away from it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, Mark. I would say, and even to the tune of hiding, like you need this column for outlet count to make the calculations on the sales per outlet. But I would probably hide that column just because that might give it away. I mean, there's not 100, Quick Trips. There's 50. So chain B's got to be Quick Trip and chain A's got to be 7-Eleven. I mean, just as an example. So I even like the idea, to Rodney's point, to even, not divulge it because outlet count would do it. Now, if you knew the buyer, and I guess I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth, but if the buyer basically said, hey, I know who chain A is, I might go, well, if you know who it is, then again, I'm not going to confirm or deny that, but then you can see the opportunity. I would probably want to have, to Rodney's point, this ability to say, hey, I'm not sharing your numbers when I go next door to your competitor, just like I'm not sharing theirs to you. I do think that's important. Now, if you're talking trends only and not volume numbers, sometimes trends tend to be a little less sensitive because we don't know how much business they're actually doing. We just know if they're up or down. So that might be an exception to that. Make sense, Mark?
Makes sense.
Okay. So again, I would want you to really just be focused on the news. Don't worry about where the business is at. Don't worry about if it's positive or negative. Because ultimately we're just trying to identify in this chapter what's going on and collaborate with what's going on to identify an opportunity. Because whenever we get to our solutions now are always going to be the why. Okay, so how are we going to fix, or why would you be underdeveloped in seltzers? Why would you be underperforming in craft? Well, maybe you're not carrying the right items. Maybe you're not promoting the right items. Now, when I mentioned earlier, when you look at the chapters of a story, you got what's going on and why. So you can't debate what's going on, but you can debate why. You can debate with why it's going on. So everyone, so if Rodney brings me an assortment solution, that's his opinion on how I should try to close the gap. It would look a lot different if Ryan gave me his solution. So it's okay, so insight and why is always going to be opinion. What is going on is always going to be, it's not, you can't refute it. Does that make sense? So listen, the last thing I wanted to do is just kind of give you a handle on, if we were to present a presentation, how often are we going to be talking about this particular chapter around identifying opportunities? Well, our title page, but then you go right into our objective slide, we get right into these gaps. If you've uncovered their KPIs and now you're going to just reconfirm, we're going back to things that matter to them. So, hey, every time I've been in here, you've been really clear that increasing beer category sales is high on your radar, and improving your segment development within craft is something more specifically that you're trying to get accomplished. Is that still the case? Is this still accurate in terms of what's high on your radar? Question mark. So we started right here. Then we have our agenda, you know, nothing here, but then we get into our first, what I would call what's going on slide. So what we're looking at here, Mr. Matthews, is your beer category broken down by segment. You know, you talked earlier how important it was to improve your craft development. Now you're already, as you know, well developed at 129, but is the goal still 135? You talked about 135. Is that still the goal? So we're talking about it here. And then if craft trying to get to 135 is important, well, if we're trying to get craft to 135, the next thing we wanted to look at was, this is your craft segment broken down by style. And if we're trying to improve your craft development, are there any styles that offer an opportunity? Well, it didn't take long for us to look at the seasonal style and say, you know what, within the craft segment, if we can improve your development within seasonal, that represents over $800,000 of opportunity. That's going to go right into this notion of helping improve overall category sales and certainly improving your craft development. Both things that you said were important. Then when we get into our solution, so here's what we're going to be adding. It's going to add in, you know, $589,000 of revenue. What we're going to be asking you to reduce in terms of distribution is going to lose you $68,000. So there's a net 521. So as a subset of that $800,000 seasonal opportunity, we're going to close 64% of that. So, you know, I should actually have, Jim, on this slide, a big fat asterisk.
Why don't you, Tom?
I don't know, Jim, but I'm, oh, shoot. Okay, forget that. Anyway, you know where I'm going.
Yeah. A little disappointed.
Yeah, you know what? You have every right to be. Every right.
We might have to edit this portion right out of the presentation, Tom.
No, I think this is making a point how important the solution is, that we can still tie it into how it closes those gaps.
So this was your plan?
This was actually my whole plan all along. I wanted to make it look like it was kind of impromptu, but it was, I mean, come on.
There we go. I don't know why I questioned you.
Why would you even question? And then obviously the final recap would be this now we lay out what we want. We want to increase distribution on those select SKUs, reduce distribution on some select SKUs, overall driving potentially over $500,000 in revenue, closing 64% of your seasonal gap, which is going to go a long way to helping improve your overall craft segment development. Things earlier that you mentioned were critically important. So what do you think? Any thoughts, any comments, any questions around identifying opportunities and this idea that if you worked for me, it would be not negotiable that we are identifying opportunities on every presentation? Jim.
Tom, I'm just thinking here in terms of your survey, the surveys you do with the retailer, excuse me,
Yeah.
with suppliers.
Yeah.
What is the number one thing that most retailers are telling you that there's an opportunity for suppliers to become better at?
Well, they do. It's empathy. Number one has always been understand my goals, strategies, and tactics. So if you can understand the KPI, I think this is where you're going with this.
Yeah.
You have to do the opportunity gap analysis. Otherwise, you're not going to help them solve any problems. And every KPI that they have is like, you could associate that with a problem. I gotta get to this level of performance. I gotta grow the business. I gotta make this much more. So I gotta solve this. Well, you can't solve it without the gap analysis. You really can't. Because you really won't know where to look to say, where is some low-hanging fruit? Where can if I put some effort against it, is there much in it for me? Well, yes. The gaps will outline that.
Yeah, I can't imagine how much more your rapport and bond you might have with the buyer when they know that you're taking the time and the effort to identify where these opportunities exist that are going to help their business. I mean, really, usually it's all about, the agenda of the individual walking in They want to get their placement. They want more space in
No
the,
doubt.
in the set, et cetera.
Hey, Jim, look at Thomas wants to do a high five. Woohoo.
Yes.
I'm
Hey,
kidding. Thomas has a question or comment.
I do. So understanding what we're doing with the share, I can wrap my head around it all. But when we're looking at expanding into new markets or leading with innovation, how can we work on forecasting the dollar share when we don't have, pardon me, like an accurate dollar per point for that market?
You talking about at the SKU level?
Yeah, so like if we're entering a new market, like we're entering New Mexico, we can't really forecast what we look like in New Mexico without that data. And then on that second tone, we have new innovation coming for the spring. So when we look at those kind of replacement level things, how can we get a dollar based off of something that doesn't exist?
Well, you got to get a little creative. And, so if you think about maybe getting to some market that is outside of your core market. So maybe it's a market in Utah, maybe it's a market in California, that if you were to look at, okay, so in other markets, we're the same level as X SKU. So in New Mexico, this SKU brings this much to the table. We would expect to be a similar velocity level or a similar share level or a volume level. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it would be, just look at kind of the share that any SKU would bring, and then just take that share and go, hey, this share is a half a share point of all of Kraft. So in New Mexico, half a share would look like the following revenue. Would be a couple different ways to do it. The key would be try to under promise and over deliver, because you could promise, oh, I'm going to bring this much to the table. And if you don't do it, then that trust could erode, and you don't want that to happen. Make sense? Make sense,
Yeah,
Thomas?
it does. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
so Tom, on that though, if it's a brand new product that you're rolling out though, and you don't have any other comparison in another state or anything else, would you just take a like SKU, whether it be your own or another, that this package or SKU, this innovation is going to be competing in the same category in the same space as this? And we believe that if it performs the same way it does here, or it performs the same way as this particular SKU, this is what you can expect to gain from it.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, as long as you can justify it
Mhm.
and you can explain it. Yeah, I mean, I think, you're going to be kind of recognized over time as to how accurate you are. So if people are coming in, given pie in the sky numbers, they're going to get exposed at some point, and then the trust is gone.
Right.
So that's why we love under promise, over deliver. Anyone else have any comments or questions about today's program? Are you all like, I'm going to run to my computer and I cannot wait to build this gap analysis, and I can't wait to practice. I can't wait. Are we all there?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to have to run very far.
They don't have to run very far.
No, it's great information. Thank you for allowing me to be on the call.
You're quite welcome. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Rodney and Ryan and Thomas, thank you. I see Sean, he got out of timeout. He was grounded in timeout, and now he's here. So I hope you learned your lesson, Sean, and won't.
Based on that
Nope.
last call that took almost an hour more than it was scheduled for, I would have rather been in timeout.
Don, what did you do? Did you go outside with your socks on? Is that?
Yeah.
No. I'd rather take the wrath of going outside with socks on than what I just had to deal with.
Well, good to have you on, Shawnee,
Good to be
albeit
here.
a little late. So, Jimmy, any final comments, any words of wisdom?
Yeah, buy high, sell low. No.
Yeah,
Um,
I've always, that's all I've ever wanted to do.
It goes
That's
the
all
other
I've
way.
ever wanted.
I think it goes the other way. If you haven't listened to Tool's most recent album, you should go out and buy it.
Ooh,
If you don't know about, or you can download it or whatever. And then the other thing is that who in here is a music history fan? You like music? Just raise your hand. All right. Who here, by raise of hand, has ever heard of the Grandy Ballroom in Detroit? Michigan? Yeah, but they're not from Detroit, Tom. There's no excuse for
Then
that.
why'd you ask?
I just was curious. Just
I
curious.
mean, I've heard of Pine Knob.
Yeah.
I've heard of,
So if you're a music fan, just Google Grandy Ballroom, Detroit, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, how many people have heard of Fillmore East? In New York City, Fillmore West? Okay. Grandy Ballroom was every bit the Fillmore East of Detroit. And this guy here claims he's a Detroiter.
hey, it closed when I was 11, okay? I wasn't going to rock concerts at 11.
You know,
I mean, I'm not saying that you're that much older than me. but-
you know who Elvis Presley is.
I do,
Right. So whatever.
but I wouldn't. Mark, have you ever heard of Grandy Ballroom?
I have not actually.
See? Okay. Sean, you ever heard of Grandy Ballroom? Sean grew up in Detroit.
I don't know if that's a venue or a band.
It's a
a
venue. It's a former venue.
It
I've
is-
looked it up since Jim mentioned it. And, again, Jim, I think whenever you can like really call out and put me down in front of other people, I think you should always seize that opportunity. Because
I'm going
I-
to. Because it goes.
Payback is,
It's a two-way street, okay? And I've got tons of opportunities here. So the last thing I will just say with that, with regards is a YouTube it as well, because there's a great little documentary. And if you have any interest in music history, rock music, you'll appreciate it. Tom, that's all I have to say.
that's a freebie. That's a freebie from Jim Kaleka,
Free.
a rock and roll freebie.
So go for
Well,
it.
I'm going to let these folks rock and roll their way back to their desks and get back to their productive days. So enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you next month. We're going to get into the solutions one. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments or successes or challenges, reach out. We love to hear from you. So thanks,
Mark.
everybody.
Thank you guys. Great to see you.
Peace
Take
out.
care. Have a great
Yeah.
week.